Honorable Senators, I beg to remind that when the Senate rose, the question was that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $6,276,000 from the special fund resources of the bank's Special Development Fund to support the Youth Economy Project. Be it further resolved that A, the loan is repayable in 92 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments. B, the loan payments commence on the first day of January, the first day of April, the first day of July, and the first day of October of each year after a grace period of 2 years following the dates of the loan, or such later dates as the bank may specify in writing. C, interest is payable at a rate of 0.75% per annum on the amount of the loan disbursed and outstanding. Senator Jawahir.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. Good afternoon, colleagues senators. Mr. Deputy, I rise to make my contribution on the resolution before us to borrow for capital and current expenditure to support the Youth Economy Project. But before I do so, I just beg leave of you just for about 2 minutes to say thank you to my colleague senators for their well wishes. Thank you to the Parliamentarians body for recognizing the work of young people in government and for electing me as their vice president for Parliamentarians for the Caribbean as it relates to the gender equality portfolio. Mr. Vice President, we all know that to whom much is given, much is expected, and so I vow to the people of St. Lucia to do my best to represent the interests of women, girls, and disenfranchised groups. Mr. President, I also want to lend my voice to that of my colleague senators to congratulate teachers on World Teachers Day, and of course a lot of the teachers who have been very instrumental in my upbringing, and they are very aware of the challenges that I faced as a child growing up, especially Teacher Joseph of J.N.O. Tiroche and Teacher Carol Valse, who also happens to be his sister, two teachers who were very instrumental in my time at the Forest Year Methodist Combined School. I want to say thank you to teachers and thank you for your dedication and your work to help us get here. It is no surprise, Mr. Deputy, that our Prime Minister has already allocated an increase for teachers. They did receive it in terms of their teaching resources because he recognized that sometimes these very same teachers have to put their hands in their pockets. And I remember going to school and not being able to afford the $1 a day for the school feeding program. And some of these teachers were able to pay that on my behalf. So I want to say a very special thank you to our teachers. Further, we are all wearing pink. I did mention it, but again, I just want to make an appeal to those who may have missed the Senate sitting earlier this morning, but for us all women and girls to ensure that on a regular basis we get the mammograms so we can perhaps detect very early if we would be diagnosed with breast cancer. The entire month of October is recognized as Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Mr. Deputy, the motion before us, which speaks of borrowing of government from the special funds resources of the Caribbean Development Bank's Development Fund of US $6.276 million to support the youth economy. Now, Mr. Deputy, we've come to this honorable chamber many times to debate the youth economy, whether it be the implementation of the Youth Economy Agency, the Youth Economy Act, or monies borrowed to facilitate supporting our young people. I recall the Prime Minister saying a big thank you to the people of the Republic of China of Taiwan for their contribution and the initial injection of funds towards supporting the Brainchild, which was the flagship promise of the St. Lucia Labour Party. This SLP campaigned heavily on ensuring that we were going to prioritize young people. Why was it so important for us to do so, Mr. Deputy President? It's because we recognize that majority of our population is made up of young people. Majority of our population is also made up of young persons between the ages of 10 to 35. And it was as if our Prime Minister, Honorable Philip JPA, had the foresight, and I'm not saying he predicted that the pandemic would come, but although he campaigned on reinstating the one laptop per child program, and we were dealt the COVID blow where our children had to eventually use the laptops, the Prime Minister, in his wisdom, did see the need for us to invest in our young people because he realized the challenges that they faced. Now, I'm giving this backstory to really help us understand why it is necessary for us to continue to support young people in St. Lucia. Mr. President, I remember going to South Louis Community College. I went to DTEMS, and there was a young man back then who wanted to develop an app. He wanted to do some grocery app in the Caribbean, more of an e-commerce platform. And he had this brilliant idea he shared with us, but he was only at South Louis. Could not afford to get the support so he can develop that app. And of course, his family did not have that economic financial standing to support him. It so happened that maybe I think it was about maybe a year and a half later, we learned that some other business person was able to develop that app. And of course, he was discouraged because his idea could not have seen development. Mr. Vice President, the situation that we are faced with in St. Lucia is that our young people, like this young man in St. Lucia, who would have gone to South Louis, who would have had a business idea, would need to have established a savings with a bank or a lending institution for a period of about 2 years to establish a credit line so they can get funding for their business ideas. Now, Mr. President, when you think of not being able to afford, not having an aunt or uncle, or not knowing somebody in society to be able to guarantee a loan for you, it would make it almost impossible for someone coming from a poorer socioeconomic background to be able to get funding to support their business idea. Now, when you go to the development banks, they have a checklist of items that you may never be able to achieve, and probably until you're close to being retired. As a result, Prime Minister Philip JPA said that he wanted to make this easier for young people. Coming from the COVID-19 pandemic especially, our young people had a lot of brilliant business ideas. Some of them lost their jobs. Over 15,000 persons we know from the hospitality sector were displaced. A lot of them were young people. And so it was even very challenging for them to get back into gainful employment because, we were trying to recover from COVID where the tourism sector is concerned. And so some of them developed a lot of social media business ideas. Some of them realized that they had skills and talents in doing nails, and I got my nails done by a young lady. Some of them decided that, they could be able to do weave and makeup and brilliant creative ideas, but they have no financial support. They have no capital. They have nothing to invest in. What the Youth Economy Act has now been able to do was allow for a youth economy agency to have been developed only about 7 months. Only about 7 months from as early as March of this year, to be able to provide easier opportunities, easier access to finance, easier access to training, easier access to mentorship, and of course, easier access to marketing. The youth economy has now been able to relate to us, and I know colleague senators before have touched on that over 200 persons, 200 young persons are beneficiaries of the youth economy grant. Yes, over 1,000 applications have been received. 200 persons so far have received funds from the youth economy, Mr. President. And Mr. President, do you know how much that has amounted to? That has amounted to, in a little of 7 months, over $1 million distributed by a St. Lucia Labour Party administration to be able to sustain and allow our young people to sustain their enterprises. And then we are being told by the Prime Minister that another 100 applications have been fully reviewed, and very soon we will see that this 200 will now be increased to 300. Mr. President, yes, the St. Lucia Labour Party is investing in our young people. Yes, the St. Lucia Labour Party has put measures in place to ensure that young people have an equal opportunity. And yes, the Labour Party is not saying if you were a supporter of Flurbo, a supporter of Blue Wave, that we will not support you. We have made the Youth Economy Agency accessible. The Youth Economy Agency is on the chaussee, an area that oftentimes people say is a no-walk zone. The Prime Minister has brought this enterprise to young people to make it more easily accessible to them. Now I want to know, what is the problem with investing in our young people, Mr. President? I want to know, what is the United Workers' Party's issue with young people? Now in one breath they will say that they support the efforts of young people, and in another breath they will say that this cannot work. Mr. President, it seems that the United Workers' Party is an enemy of the youth, and I will tell you why. Although the
Mr. President, I stand on a point of order.
Sorry,
I think,
Senator Fede, hold on, let me acknowledge you.
Yeah.
What's your point of order?
Grossly reckless and irresponsible, misleading the House by stating that the United Workers' Party is an enemy of the youth. I mean, what are we doing? That cannot be accepted. We're not saying that we're against young people. If there's one thing we're against, is how you're managing the program and how you're elevating the rhetoric against elevating the rhetoric and delivering very little.
Just now, please proceed, Senator Jalal.
Yes, I said it seems that the United Workers' Party is an enemy of the youth, but if you want me to clarify, I will clarify. The United Workers' Party, the senator before me did speak and say that it seems that the United Workers' Party has something against young people and that young people are criminals. The senator on the other side stood and said that is not true. But the senator never stated that United Workers' Party said. She only implied. Because it was the same United Workers' Party whose leader took to a platform, took to the media and said that single mothers were the bearers of criminals. Single mothers bearing children. Aren't you against young people? But let's go a little further. Since you want to open that door, I will walk in it. Yes. The United Workers' Party has made it an issue of attacking young people. And I want to make a document of the House, a news clipping that went out about me earlier today. Mr. President, the United Workers' Party stood on a platform. The United Workers' Party stood on a platform on Sunday. The United Workers' Party stood on a platform on Sunday. And the leader of opposition business was hosting the meeting at the time. And he invited Guy Joseph to stand right next to him. And you know what he did? And I was waiting for the leader of government business to come to talk about that health and security levy. And I'm that leader of opposition business, and I'm tying it to you, Mr. Deputy. I was waiting for him to come and talk about health and security levy, and I want to tell the people of St. Lucia, this is something we need to be very concerned about.
That's right.
The United Workers' Party, Guy Joseph, and the leader of opposition business stood on a platform in Bellevue and called me a liar. Why did they call me a liar? And I believe it is an attack on young people. I don't feel personally that I need to defend myself, but I think young people need to be defended. They said that I am being hired by government. I took an oath and I am lying to the people about the health and security levy. And they also said that this is what you get for putting little children to do big people work. And you know what the leader of opposition did? He was clapping. But I want Guy Joseph and the leader of the opposition to know that no matter what they can, it's like you're not learning your lesson. Some time ago, they had a big row with the NYC, saying that NYC people believe that they're supposed to get benefits. The largest population of the country, they attacked, and then they said that is what you get for putting young people to do big people business, because the United Workers' Party does not believe in the youth. It's as if the youth is the enemy of the UWP. But it's this same young person who is now being recognized by regional entities. This same young person is given a seat at the table to speak on behalf of young people. How many young people has the UWP on their side in the political sphere, sitting around the table, sitting in parliament, whether it be in the lower house or in the upper house? You cannot talk about your contribution for young people. You cannot talk. And Mr. President, when he was referring to young people, he spoke of the tourism sector, and I just want to briefly touch upon that. And he spoke of the hotel in Ancillary. Mr. Vice President, that same member is very aware that Ancillary has 14 Airbnbs, registered Airbnbs. You know what he did? And speaking of young people and development of young people, he did not seek to sustain or provide support for these Airbnbs. Instead, he wants to come today and talk about a hotel that is 90% complete. You were in the position. You did not pave one road. What were your development opportunities in tourism and for youth in Ancillary? You could not even do that. But you want to come and start and talk about what this SLP is not doing. I want to know what it is that young people have done to the United Workers' Party. Mr. President, this resolution, this borrowing of funds, it does a lot for our young people. It hurts my heart again, Senator KJ, and I have to agree with you. It hurts when you see you come and you hear crying for ways to reduce crime. You are here crying for ways to provide more jobs. You are here crying to ensure that young people finally have a seat at the table. But what is the United Workers' Party's problem with the youth? Look, today they want to go and say, oh, I have a contract with a company. I am a marketing professional. I have a master's in strategic communication, and I have not disobeyed any part of the Constitution of St. Lucia that would prevent me from going into business with any entity. But they are trying to grasp at straws to say that I am using my political office to gain favor. Let me tell you in case people have forgotten what the United Workers' Party did. I remember I was being invited to sit on a political platform. I just sat there as a show of support for young people. They called the person that was hiring me, and guess what happened? I was fired. I was on the platform sitting on a Wednesday evening. Thursday, the Star newspaper interviews me. Saturday, big and bold on the Star front page, is this peer's weapon for guy destruction. A few days later, I was given walking papers because somebody from the United Workers' Party called and said I should not be allowed to work. I should not be allowed to eat. Young people should not be allowed to work, should not be allowed to eat. Guess what? I make less than $2,000 a month coming here, giving my life, my sweat and sacrifice to ensure that young people have a voice in this chamber, Mr. Vice President. And I will not be swayed. I will not be distracted. And as my Prime Minister says, my eyes are on the prize. I will speak for the young people of St. Lucia. When the United Workers' Party is able to do the same and ensure that there are resources available for young people, tell them come and talk to me. I will be happy to engage them. But Mr. President, like I said, this will reduce in crime and violence, similarly to us getting the resources from the Health and Security Levy to be able to put towards the police force, to be able to put towards the fire service, to be able to put towards agencies that will secure our people. But you'll have a problem with everything. You'll have a problem with security. You'll have a problem with youth. We give money to the fire service. That's not good enough for the United Workers' Party. We give children laptops, because you do not believe in young people. You don't believe that we need to empower people. You insist that young people or people need to be coming and begging politicians every time. Mr. President, I am not a parliamentary rep, but yes, people from the community might know me, and they know me to be a spokesperson for the party. Mr. President, it is so heartbreaking for a man who is 40-something years old, for him to have to come to me and ask me for $50 to buy cooking gas. I would hold my chest, Mr. President. You know why? Because I know for a man it is difficult for him to even make that approach. But the United Workers' Party They want you to feed out of their hands. As St. Lucia Labour Party is saying, I will teach you how to fish. I will teach you to be able to go and get and purchase that own cooking gas for yourself. I will not have you to be dependent on politicians, because smart politicians, that's how they work. But the United Workers' Party did not have the foresight to do so. And of course, Mr. President, I noted that there is the promotion of gender equality, because in this youth economy, in this resolution, when the Prime Minister presented it, there will be a social and gender specialist that will be hired. So at least persons from all spectrums will not be left behind, especially our women. But Mr. President, I really just wanted to make a very quick intervention on this and say that unwaveringly I support the passage of this resolution, so the Minister of Finance can borrow $6 million to ensure that we continue to sustain the business ideas of our young people.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Oh, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, properly inspired, brief but fiery. I must thank my colleague senators for their contributions to this motion. And I now wish to respond and provide some further explanations that perhaps did not stick when I first presented the motion, for the benefit of all concerned, particularly the opposition. First of all, Madam Mr. Deputy President, I want to re-emphasize that this morning, when this motion was presented, it was a motion to authorize sourcing funds to support the youth economy. And for some time today, I was listening to the presentations that were made, and I was wondering whether we are still debating that particular motion. So I had some difficulty trying to follow the discussion, but I was able to, at some point, formulate a few responses. First of all, I want to agree with Senator Daniel, who made a point that the opposition finds a way, no matter what the issue is, and he used the word diss, to really diss anything that we put on the table, good, bad, or ugly. Just finds a way to say it's not good. And when the opposition cannot find fault with the issue or the motion, if it is a motion that is so clear and so prudent and so straightforward that it is so obvious that it is good for the country, then, as was done by the leader of opposition business, they attempt to claim it. Oh, it was our idea. So the opposition, first of all, with the leader's presentation, he started off, and by the way, he used his entire period of time. It was interesting to see a member of the Senate use an entire presentation, exhausted every single second. And by the time he was finished, there was nothing substantial that I could have gathered from that presentation. So, Mr. Deputy President, it was at the start of the presentation of the youth economy debate, the leader of opposition business tried to claim the idea. Oh, this is not new. This was something that we were doing, and credited the former Minister for Commerce. Then he got lost in that argument, because clearly that argument was not logical, and so he took a swipe at the independent senator. Very unusual for that to happen in this house, accusing him of supporting the government. And then he got lost again, and then moved to try to mimic Jamaica, a whole long lecture about the politics of Jamaica, and quite hypocritically talking about continuing a shared vision, which is the direct opposite of what his government did when they came into office, abandoned every policy that the Labour Party had suggested. So from claiming the idea, this going after the independent senator, then he went and tried to discuss Jamaica politics, got lost, then went after the vaccine money. How could you come to this Senate? We're debating a youth economy motion. and you introduce. Now, I was tempted to stand on the point of order, Mr. Deputy, to indicate that he was violating a standing order that refers to introducing ideas or information that is not relevant. But 37.1, I let it go because all it does is just gives me content to deal with. To suggest that you want to bring in vaccines into the debate when the vaccines tag is on your forehead.
That's it.
You are the one who went about doing this vaccines deal. It was not us. And then you bring the vaccine in. So that did not work because we didn't take it on. And so it then became the UWP made one mistake in the last elections, and that they did not shout loud enough. So I was thinking, okay, they did not shout loud enough. Maybe that is true, Mr. Deputy. Or maybe what they were shouting out so loudly, instead of shouting out on things that were relevant to the people, they were probably shouting out Permandu. I don't know, maybe they were shouting out DSH. And the Pearl of the Caribbean. Maybe they were shouting out CHTTI. Maybe the opposition was shouting out Jack Lam. Maybe they were shouting out Range. And I remember the minister then, he was then the Minister for Tourism, explaining a net gain after we have had to pay back investment monies to an investor because they faltered on the investment. He was boasting about having a net gain. How could you have a net gain when you have to pay back? So maybe these are the things that the government was shouting out so loudly that, and by the way, not forgetting the insults that were being shouted out at the people of this country. And therefore, I think the opposition has learned the lesson that when you are shouting out, do what we are doing now. Let us shout out on the achievements of our government and what we are doing for the people. Let us shout out about the benefits of the youth economy to the young people of this country and how they can become entrepreneurs and how they can develop and grow their own wealth. Let us shout that out. Let's stop shouting out insults and abuse and all kinds of things about people's character and personalizing those things. That is not what we are here to shout out. So, Mr. Deputy President, again, the leader of opposition business got lost in that discussion. And so he attempted to do one of his favorite moves. Picked up the Social and Economic Review, forgetting that we too have a copy. He has done that so many times. And decided to make a comparison of figures. So I take you to the page, Mr. Deputy President, that he quoted. Page 110. And he referred to a table. And the table he referred to was table 31. In his attempt to make it appear as if under his government's watch, unemployment among youth had declined so well, he quoted selectively from the table. But permit me, Mr. Deputy President, to refer to that very same table. Table 31, 2015 youth unemployment rate. He was very happy to quote that it was 40%. It's actually 41, yes, 41%. And then he jumped to, he didn't mention 2016, 2017, 2018. He jumped to 2019. And he said it moved from 41% to 30% in 2019, 31.6. But Mr. Deputy President, what happened to 2017 under his government's watch? No COVID. What happened to 2018 under his government's watch? No COVID. There was a gradual decline. For some reason, I would have said that if I were he, because it showed 38.4 in 2016, 38.5. So there was already a decline in 2016 when we were still in government and they assumed the reins of government. So there was a decline. Then we went to jumped to 2019 to make a point. But Mr. Deputy President, let's go to 2020, COVID, we can explain maybe. 2021, 37.07. From 31, there was a jump. But you see, I am not afraid to say what it is. I am giving the full picture. I'm not hiding statistics.
That's right.
Why do you have to hide it? You could have explained that, okay, there was an increase in unemployment, but perhaps it was due to COVID. But you decide not to mention it at all. We have to stop playing these games, Mr. Deputy. The document is available to us. If you want to make a point, quote the information correctly. But here is what he did not see. And I want to make sure that this is said. Let us now look at the figures for 2022. And I kept telling him, when he started with this quoting, I kept telling him, state the figures. You start with 2015. That was while we were in government, the Labour Party. And you quote 40%. But you do not, or you refuse to refer to the 2022 figures now that the Labour Party is back in government. And it has dropped to 26.9%. Somehow the leader of opposition business refused to see that in that same table there is a 26.9%, representing a drop of almost 14%.
Mr. President, I stand on a point of order.
Sorry, Senator Fede, what's your point of order?
The leader of government business is misleading the House by suggesting that I'm trying to hide the statistics. I have indicated in my presentation that 2022 reduced to that I cannot use the 26.9 in 2022 because the methodology has changed. And I did state that. And when I was stating so, the same member, Senator Jean, said, oh, we know that already. So the reason why it cannot be compared and used in the preceding years is because the methodology for measuring employment and all the other indicators in the main labor service survey, the labor force indicators, is because the methodology has changed. We're now using the ILO methodology, and going forward, this will be a base year to measure it going forward.
So, Deputy, is he elucidating? I did not into that.
Well, sorry, he indicated that you were mischaracterizing what he had said. I do believe he did mention the year 2022. He didn't quote the figures, but he did say that he couldn't rely on it because of the change in methodology.
In that case, Mr. Deputy President, I was absolutely correct, because I never said that he interpreted. I said he did not mention 2022 figures. That's what I said. And exactly what you said, Mr. Deputy. He did not mention the 2022 figures. That these were my exact words. And when the opposition leader of opposition business pretends to be standing on a point of order, to stand on a point of elucidation, to try to explain, he needs to state that he's standing on a point of elucidation and allow me to yield. Because he's again playing tricks. He's standing on a point of order, but he really wants to elucidate. Mr. Deputy President, I was not suggesting that 2022 was not in the discussion, but he did not quote the figures. So he's now standing to try to explain that is a different methodology. He was, Mr. Deputy. He was hiding the figures because he didn't quote them.
Let's move on to the point. Sorry,
Point of order.
Thank
the
you.
members cannot accuse me of hiding the figures.
Yes, Senator, I understand.
Mr. President, that is a gross misrepresentation of the facts of what happened. So, for political reasons, the member cannot...
Senator, thank you.
He cannot ascribe that to me.
Thank you. And he is correct. He did mention why he was not going to quote the figures. I don't think it is fair to say that he was hiding the figure. So if you want to make a point, you can make a point in relation to the specific figure, but I don't think you can accuse the senator of hiding the figure.
Mr. Deputy, unlike the senator, I will not disobey your ruling, because I heard you ask him to stop and he went on. I will just repeat that the senator did not quote the figures. I'll say no more. So that, Mr. Deputy, back to the argument on the trend of the pattern of behavior by the opposition. Having moved away into 6 different directions on the same debate and not finding his bearings, he then jumped to village tourism. You know, we're talking about youth economy, a motion to finance the youth economy. We start with my idea in Jamaica politics, vaccines, money, and all kinds of things, just convoluted. I don't know how you can have a presentation like that. And I must say, Mr. Deputy, you give a lot of latitude today, I must say. But then it was village tourism. So village tourism became the focus of the debate. But Mr. Deputy, at that point, the opposition leader of opposition business, attempted to suggest that his government built an hotel. And when it was challenged, again, you know, as slippery as he is, he said, well, it was a 90% complete project. And then he said they completed 10 rooms. 10 rooms.
Excuse me. Members, you address the chair, not each other. It's getting a little out of hand this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. This thing flying across there is a little distracting. So, again, did you build a hotel? Did you have a 90% complete, or did you build 10 rooms? What is it?
What is it?
All three of these statements were made in the same argument by the same individual. So, Mr. Deputy President, again, unfounded, all over the place, convoluted, things that you cannot logically follow are happening just to show that you do not support or an attempt to, as was mentioned by my colleague, an initiative that is in the interest of the young people of this country. So, Mr. Deputy, there was an attempt at the end to, I would think, undermine some of the work that is being done by the current parliamentary rep. And I want to say, it seems that the leader of opposition business has not realized that the parliamentary representative for Ansari Canaries is the Honorable Wayne Girard. He is a tall gentleman, very tall, taller than me, by the name of Honorable Wayne Girard. And I saw an attempt by the leader of opposition business, instead of speaking to the motion, to try to talk about his achievements in Ansari Canaries. But I thought that instead of all that happened, that should have happened during the tenure of his government and during the campaign to convince the people of Ansari Canaries to return him to office. But it is now the parliament, it is now the constituency that is represented by someone else. And so I would like to advise that the leader of opposition business sticks to the debate and sticks to the motions in front of us, and not to try to use this platform to try to, talk about the projects that he claims to have completed, that up to this point moved from building a hotel 90% complete and then 10 rooms. So, Mr. Deputy President, all we had this morning was a charade that really did not do justice to the motion. Now, I think Senator Shalry used some concrete examples of how this Youth Economy Agency facility, how it really has worked, and she used some examples of real people giving real experiences, and I thought that was very instructive, because that is the only way you can know if a government initiative is working. You ask the people, you listen to their response, and you observe their reaction, and then you know. So I think it is very clear that based on the accounts that she gave, there is quite a lot of evidence to suggest that so far our young people are benefiting and are happy with what is being delivered. So, Mr. Deputy President, I want to tell you that these initiatives are not being done in isolation. Now, you see, one of the members just returned, but you're distracting me. Mr. Deputy President, this initiative, the youth economy concept, is not in a vacuum by itself. Earlier on in my first presentation, I hinted, and I think more than hinted, that it is being complemented by the small, medium, and micro enterprise program where $10 million was invested. I also can mention, as was mentioned by my colleague senators, that there are several other government initiatives that are providing support for various sections of the population. For teachers, Senator Jawahir was speaking about it. Senator Tuse gave you the examples. Senator Jean had a very detailed discussion on the various technicalities on how the loans are financed, and I think also Senator Daniel also gave a very philosophical explanation on why it is important for some of those ideas to come together. I want to also remind the opposition that to complement some of these initiatives, that the government's overall policy of facilitating growth in this country and making it easier for people includes something that I think he has probably not heard and has not remembered. For a very long time in this Senate, the honorable member has been asking the government about his $1,500, his $1,500. Up to the point where I was telling him, why is he so fixated on that $1,500 that he claimed the Prime Minister promised? I don't know if it was only him. And the Prime Minister has explained what he said. But apparently, the $1,500 statement was raised in the lower chamber, where the Minister for Equity announced that 5,000 St. Lucians, I don't know if he's among that 5,000, 5,000 St. Lucians will be receiving as of next month $1,500 as part of the COVID support. And this is one of the initiatives that is complementing policies like the youth economy, policies like the SMME, policies like the laptop program, policies like the 80+, where you try to ensure that every sector of the population has some kind of benefit, has some kind of, is receiving some kind of support from the government policies. And this money is not going to be taken from our NIC funds. I am pleased to inform. So all that time, my colleague has been asking for the 1,500. The 1,500 was raised, and I heard nothing. Nothing. And so you know how convenient it is to not hear when things that you ask for or you talk about are being dealt with. So I look forward to the benefit of that particular initiative by the government to complement the youth economy, the SMME, and many other initiatives that are still to come to bring relief, to create employment, to empower our people in this country, and to diversify our economy. So, Mr. Deputy President, I am very excited about this. I really believe that there are lessons to be learned from this. And while the leader of opposition business was so fixated on trying to make an initiative look bad and talking about what kind of village tourism was and what names we changed and what hotels they built, I just want to ask one little question before I end. Is the village tourism he was talking about connected to or had anything to do with the lights on the Jack Mel playing field? Now he referred to me. I was sitting there in my little chair, minding my business, and he provoked me. I didn't say anything. He referred to me as a parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Tourism. So, as a parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Tourism, since he was throwing it at me about, you can check in Anstore and the projects, but there is a project, and I can speak on it because it's in the ministry where I am, where Jack Mel playing field, lighting under village tourism. Now, you see, so I don't know if there's a hotel on the Jack Mel playing field. But Mr. Deputy President, I will not go too far on this thing. I just thought I should mention it and ask the question and hope that the answers will come sooner than later.
Be quiet.
Because sometimes when sleeping, when certain people are minding their business, do not provoke them. So, Mr. Deputy, I want to end here and say that I give my full support and I thank members who did to this motion. And as always, as a comprehensive part of a comprehensive plan by this government to diversify this economy and give young people a chance to become owners of their own businesses, charter their own destiny, and accumulate and generate wealth and prosperity in our beautiful country. I thank you, Mr. Deputy.
Honorable Senators, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $6,276,000 from the special funds resources of the bank's Special Development Fund to support the Youth Economy Project. Be it further resolved that A, the loan is repayable in 92 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments. B, the loan payments commence on the first day of January, the first day of April, the first day of July, and the first day of October of each year after a grace period of 2 years, following the date of the loan or such later dates as the bank may specify in writing. Interest is payable at a rate of 0.75%. C. Interest is payable at a rate of 0.75% per annum on the amount of the loan disbursed and outstanding. I now put the question. As many are as of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many are as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, before we proceed, I just want to bring to your attention certain things I believe with regard to the conduct of members in the chamber today thus far. Please, when you're addressing, address the chair. Members have been addressing each other. That is not appropriate. Secondly, I'd like to bring to your attention Standing Order 37-1. I've given a lot of latitude. I've heard the gentle chiding of the leader of government business that I've given perhaps too much latitude. And so therefore I'd like to encourage persons to confine their comments as much as possible to the bill being debated. And finally, there's been a lot of crosstalk. I appreciate that it spurs the debate, it encourages persons, it helps with the energy in the chamber. But it does become distracting at times. I have to hear what the person on his feet is saying. Sometimes I'm hearing the crosstalk more than the speaker. Additionally, speeches are being recorded. It does not help when you have crosstalk for the stenographers to transcribe the Hansard. So as much as possible, if you want to, I can understand there has to be some degree of interaction between the members. It's to be encouraged, but not to the point where it begins to distract from the debate. Thank you. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
World Teachers Day.
It's World Teachers Day. So I think in this context, the teacher has spoken and the students need to buy. Mr. Deputy President, I am so guided and will obey your instructions at all times in this chamber. Mr. Deputy President, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Insolvency.
Insolvency.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move that this bill be presented for second reading at the next or subsequent sitting of the Senate.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Tourism Development.
Tourism Development.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Deputy President, I move that this bill be presented for second reading or at the next or subsequent sitting of the Senate.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move for second reading a bill shortly entitled Public Debt Management. Mr. President, this bill, as you would have noticed, is here for second reading, meaning that it had been previously circulated. And there's reason for that, because the contents of this bill suggest that it has very serious implications for the accountability by the government of public funds. And so this bill is very important and very critical as far as governance and public accountability is concerned. Now, this bill should have been tabled since October 2020, Mr. Deputy President.
Was in government.
And it is very obvious, if you have to do the math, to figure out who was supposed to have tabled that bill. And it will live for us to wonder why it was not. But the St. Lucia Labour Party government has always had to pride itself on being accountable. And so we have made a very bold and brave move to take this bill to be tabled today. Mr. Deputy President, this bill should have set the precedent for public debt management way back then. And again, it was not tabled, and so we might be able to understand now why some of those decisions that were made. I must tell you that with a bill like this, there are certain decisions that a government or government officials or Minister of Finance or anyone would just not have been able to make. It was just not going to happen with a bill like this. And so the Labour Party government is extremely comfortable with such a bill. I know some ministers of finance in the region have had their own misgivings about it. There are some arguments that suggest that this bill may be tying the hands of a Minister of Finance because of so many various processes and so much that has to be, to be done. But the Labour Party government is not uncomfortable with anything that seeks to guarantee accountability and transparency with public finance management. And so we are here to pass this bill. Mr. Deputy President, the IMF report of 2022 indicated that this bill will do a number of things. Among them, it is supposed to enhance accountability and transparency in government. And so the bill seeks to ensure that there is sound fiscal policy in relation to public funds. The bill also provides for management legislation to put in place such entities such as debt management, a debt management unit, and a debt management committee. So you have an entire unit that has to be set up, and there's also a committee. The bill also makes provision for the publication of a medium debt management strategy for the government. So not only do you have to set up a unit, you have to come up with a debt management strategy. So it forces you, if you're not inclined, to have to do that. Mr. Deputy President, in addition, this bill provides authority of the Ministry of Finance to be the sole borrowing agency of the government. I'll say that again. This bill provides for the authority of the Ministry of Finance, or the Minister on behalf of the Ministry of Finance, to be the sole borrowing agency of government. So what it means is that all various statutory groups and all various entities can't just go and borrow money in the name of the government. The Ministry of Finance can do that. And so what can happen is that for any other entity to act, you have to satisfy certain principles or certain guidelines. So this bill really protects the integrity of the way public funds are handled. It is a very courageous move, and I want to compliment the Honorable Prime Minister for taking this to Parliament, because it, of course, gives him less latitude. There are a lot of restrictions, but being the type of individual that he is, I can see why he is comfortable taking it to the Parliament. Mr. Deputy President, I am happy to see that this bill will not allow for certain practices to continue. For instance, no one Minister of Finance, Mr. Deputy President, will be able to unilaterally cancel a private-public partnership to build an airport and revert to a direct award for any one entity that is selected on the whims and fancies of any Minister of Finance. Not Philip Joseph Pierre, not John Peter, not anybody else. That bill, had it been passed, perhaps we would not have had that situation as when it comes to the HIA. That bill also would not have made it possible for an agency like SASPA to have the government to guarantee them borrowing $175 million US, almost $500 million for a single project, the largest capital project ever to be undertaken in this country. Not a single bit of public tendering. That is the kind of atrocity that this bill seeks to avoid. Mr. Deputy President, there are clear guidelines provided by this bill for the selection of proper borrowing instruments by the government. So you can't just decide you're using bonds for something, using treasury bills for that, using all kinds of... The instruments to be used are clearly... there's clear guidelines for the use of these instruments through this bill. It also clearly defines the responsibilities of the main players in the process: the statutory boards, the debt management agency, and the Ministry of Finance. All of them have their specific roles, and their roles are clearly defined, so there's no overlap or no confusion as to who should be doing what. And I think earlier outside of this chamber, there was a nice little discussion between myself, the leader of opposition business, and a technocrat, where there were little areas that we were able to seek clarification on. And I think this is really the essence of this bill, in that both the government and the opposition can see what the bill intends to do and can see the benefit of these particular processes. Mr. Deputy President, the bill also is a requirement for public policy loan that the government will be able to access once it puts its house in order. So when this bill is enacted, it has a number of important benefits, guidelines for the government, and I think it is really going to protect the interest of our public finance management. There are guidelines for reporting, Mr. Deputy President. And if we turn to 8.1 in the bill, it explains that the minister has to report to Parliament, not to Cabinet, on a strategy and borrowing plan for approval. You see, so many times we have had, when I was in opposition, to come to the Parliament and ask for this, ask for that. I remembered with the CIP issue, asking for reports, asking for this, and decisions were made by the executive. Decisions that were affecting the public interest being made by the executive branch of government and not by the legislative branch. So this bill ensures that the minister has to report, and the minister, there is a Minister of Finance, has to report to the Parliament on the strategy, because Parliament is represented by the people who elect you. What do you call the common people? That is why Parliament has authority. And we here in the Senate are the upper house, but it is more specifically for the people in the lower house who people voted for. They have to account to the people when it comes to how they're going to spend their tax money. And that is the beauty of such a piece of legislation. Mr. Deputy President, updates on the country's borrowing plan will have to be laid before Parliament. So you can't just come there after 5 years or 4 years in government. You have borrowed, how much was borrowed in the last 5 years? I've lost count. Almost $1 billion? They are all different. I don't think we really know you. there are different opinions, because when you look at what's on the paper or what's on the books, and then the DFCs, you really have to wonder if we really have the correct figure. But what we know is that it was the most borrowing that has ever been done by any government in the history of this country. That we know. As far as the figure, you know, because of all those irregularities, I do not want to even try to state a figure. So this is not going to be a creature of that piece of legislation where a whole term goes and monies are borrowed from all kinds of, you know, for all kinds of reasons, and the parliament does not have an account of any plan that is laid before them for borrowing. Mr. Deputy President, I believe that what this bill seeks to do, based on the objectives of the bill, based on the requirements of the bill, that a good government will be able to manage with this bill, will be able to fulfill the expectations of this bill. But any government that has other ideas will have some difficulty. And I believe it is going to help to protect the integrity of all governments, not just one party, but governments in general, in terms of their best practices, in terms of their procedures, and in terms of how they go about managing public funds. And so the St. Lucia Labour Party government is very comfortable that in just about 2 years in office, we have taken this bill before this House to be passed. Mr. Deputy President, it shows the courage of this government. It shows the level of accountability that we are prepared to put forward. And it shows our respect for the use of public funds. And so, I present this public finance management bill to the Senate for its approval for our Parliament and for our people. Thank you.
Honourable Senators, the question is that the Public Debt Management Bill be read a second time. Senator Fede?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I do begin my presentation by suggesting to you that I'm very familiar with these initiatives that is being brought to the House right now. You know, the World Bank and the IMF have been going around the Caribbean working with different governments on best practices in fiscal policy management. And this began several years ago in trying really to modernize, in some cases consolidate, update, and improve the laws as it pertains to the financial management of our country. Mr. President, you would recall that sometime back in the previous administration, this Parliament would have passed and approved the Public Finance Management Act, which really deals with fiscal management in our country. But some of the things that were foremost in our minds at the time that we contemplated such legislation was really to A, modernize, B, simplify, and D, consolidate. So this public debt management bill is something that we're quite familiar with on the opposition side. When we were contemplating our legislation, we realized that what's been happening in the region of the Caribbean is how much governments have to borrow for natural disasters, for example, and how long it takes for governments to tap funding that's available for natural disasters. And so what we would often find is that a government would, in the case of some of the natural disasters we've been through, like in Dominica, for example, where they see a significant part of their GDP by a Category 5 hurricane, which devastated their country. But it took them several years before they can start processing some of the loans. Organizations like the CDB and the World Bank even can take a very long time. And so one of the things that this brings back to my mind was when the discussions were being held in the last cabinet with the World Bank as it pertains to the development of this bill, was the need for a sinking fund. And why did we suggest that need? It was because we recognize that to overcome some of the hurdles that small island developing states like ours may confront from time to time in responding to natural disasters, that we can do so in a timely fashion if there was a buildup of cash there for the government to tap and to respond to natural disasters that much more effectively and quickly than we have been able to have. Mr. President, some time ago the Caribbean Development Bank had done a report which suggested that at least a third of the loans within the CARICOM region were as a result of responding to natural disasters. And that became a significant encumbrance on our ability to respond quickly and to, as well, institute fiscal prudence. So one of the big problems that we will have, and one of the things that we have to take into consideration, is the vulnerability and the sustainability, the susceptibility of our region to these natural disasters and the impact that they will have on our ability to manage our debt and to meet debt targets. Because really and truly, it's not just about your economic growth. It's not just about your expenditure in government that will have an impact on your debt management, but it will also be these exogenous shocks that we've had, such as COVID, for example, in responding to that pandemic, which is why I find it extremely ludicrous when I hear the members on the opposite side. It's laughable to suggest that the most any administration has had to borrow in the history of the country was during COVID. You know what, Mr. President, that's everybody's experience. Every single person, leader of government business, every single person.
Deputy, I stand on a point of order.
Sorry, leader of government business, what's your point of order?
The member has grossly misled the House and is misrepresenting. I have never stood here to say that the most that has been borrowed by any government during COVID. I never said so. What I said was that in the history of our parliament, the history of our government system, the last government has borrowed the most money, full stop. I do not want to be misrepresented.
Sorry, continue.
Yeah.
So he's referring to COVID, and I never said that. He just grossly misrepresented what I said.
Thank you. Just, okay, withdraw the reference to COVID. Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, Mr. President, I'll withdraw my reference to COVID, but I'll say this, that any government that has to manage a term where you have a pandemic or a natural disaster, you are going to face tremendous spikes in your debt. I don't care who you are. You could be the great United States of America, you could be China. When we look at the global debt records and we look at what has happened and how countries, it's a global issue. And I'm sorry that we have to come back and regurgitate all this old stuff, but I know that people watching at this broadcast will understand that the pandemic would have closed the economies around the world, not just in St. Lucia, the entire Caribbean, the entire globe. It is the worst economic depression that the world has seen since the Great Depression of the 1930s. So that pandemic brought about a tremendous economic crisis which shocked the world. So everybody borrowed. If you looked at the CDB countries, you would see that all of them had major spikes in their debt. So I'll leave that ridiculous conversation alone. But what I want to say to you, Mr. President, was that out of the construct of this, the public debt management bill, in discussing the issues with the World Bank, we find it quite enlightening, some of the things that they wanted St. Lucia to consider. I recognize that the bill actually repeals a couple pieces of legislation. In section 67, it says that the bill repeals the Treasury Bills Act, for example, and the National Savings and Development Bonds Act. What that does, it tells you that a lot of the contents in here are not new. They have basically amalgamated it. When you look at the purpose of the bill, it says to consolidate and to modernize. So I want to sort of brush aside suggestions that may suggest that this is in some way going to tie the hands of a prime minister. There's no debt ceiling here. There's no number that anybody has agreed to say that we're going to cast in stone that your debt to GDP has to be 60%, or you can only borrow 300 million a year, or whatever. There's nothing, there's no number. What this requires is that the debt management unit within the Ministry of Finance, they put together a medium-term debt strategy. They submit it to the Minister of Finance. The Minister of Finance, according to somewhere on page 18 of the Act, in section 4D, the minister is required to submit that same strategy to Cabinet no later than 2 months before the end of the financial year. So basically, it's normal procedure in debt management. So this doesn't, I don't agree with the assertion made here that this ties anybody's hand. There's nothing that is groundbreaking that's happening. A lot of these policies are very familiar. The bill makes provision for a debt advisory committee, which involves the accountant general, the director of finance, the supervisor of the debt unit is actually the secretary of the committee. She will take the records on the meetings of all of the relevant agency. The Solicitor General is one such individual as well, that is considered as part of the National Advisory on Debt. We're having this discussion, Mr. President, at a time when and you know, the social economic review, which I love, because I do believe that when you are going to have arguments about the economy or social development in general, it ought to be informed by empirical evidence. What does the social economic review tells us about our debt situation in the last 10 years? It tells us that debt has been, in 2012, $2.638 billion. And it has moved thus far, Mr. President, over the last 10 years. Now in 2022, preliminary figures suggest that it has risen to $4.39 billion. So we see that there is a significant increase in the debt over the last 10 years, regardless of who is in power. There is the same constraints, whether we like to think that we're geniuses at managing the economy. We're kidding ourselves, really, because really, when we look at it, the persisting problem of low growth and high debt has been a persistent problem that many governments have had to overcome. If we look at the Social Economic Review, there has been 20 years of deficits that governments have had to deal with. Expenses are much more, whether SLP is in government or whether the United Workers' Party, expenses have been much more than there have been revenue coming into the country. And so when you've got that figure, if you are a person and you're looking at this broadcast and you had to live your life that way, to say, well, I'm spending more than I can take in, then eventually you're going to be bankrupt. Eventually something is going to go wrong with your financial circumstances. And so that situation is not healthy for our country. So this bill, Mr. President, I hope that if, in the absence of any numbers, or in the absence of any targets, that's going to come obviously in the debt management strategies that the debt management unit in the Ministry of Finance will put together. And we hope that cabinets are going to follow the targets that they put forward, because the final sign-off, before it comes to the Parliament to borrow any money, it goes to the Cabinet, and it is only when the Cabinet says yay, then we're going to start talking about how much money that we're going to borrow. Mr. President, let's look at the debt to GDP ratio, which is a very important measurement of debt in the country. In 2012, the Social Economic Review suggests that the debt to GDP ratio, I have gone from the page long, I've closed the book, sorry. But just look at the liabilities and debt, total liabilities and debt. It's on the table of contents. It's moved from 61% to 61.1% in 2012.
Mr. Deputy President.
And it has gotten to, sorry.
Senator Shaw.
Yeah, I'm standing on a point of order, Mr. President, because if the member is quoting from documents that we have, we need to be able to reference these quotations. And we would like to ask that he indicates the pages from which he's quoting.
I'm not sure that's a point of order, but out of courtesy, if you can indicate the page, I'd be grateful.
Mr. President, I don't mind. I was able to find the page again. I've actually closed it as I started presenting. So, page 115, table number 36, we have the total public sector outstanding liabilities as at the 31st of December. And it gives us a whole account of the movement of all of our debt. And what I'm looking at is the official debt of the country. So when we look at the debt to GDP ratio from 2012, it suggests that we've had 61.1%. And then that has moved now to the preliminary figures in the year 2022 to almost 70%. It stands at 69.8%. That tells me that the debt to GDP ratio has actually moved all the way close to 70. Beg your pardon? No, it has moved upwards from 2012. I'm looking at the whole 10 years as a snapshot. So when you come all the way, it has gone like this. But where we are now is that we are actually worse than we were in 2012, because the debt to GDP ratio...
Mr. Deputy President, I stand on a point of order.
Sorry, Senator Shaw, yes.
The member is misleading the House. Mr. Deputy President, the member is using statistics in a very creative way. Mr. Deputy President, the member knows that that is not how you analyze statistics. You cannot take statistics of 2012 and juxtapose them with statistics of 2022 without looking at the trends. So this is deliberately misleading, Mr. Deputy President, for one to take statistics from 10 years forward and bring them in that way. So, Mr. Deputy President, I stand on a point of order and ask that the member not use the statistics in such a creative way to mislead the House.
Well, I don't think that the member has misled the House. The member made a very simple point to my mind. He just indicated that overall the GDP the debt to GDP ratio had increased. He gave a start point and an end point. If you wish, during your presentation, you can go into further analysis to show in more detail what has happened. But the basic point he's making, I think, holds from the two figures at least that he has quoted. Let him proceed. Thank you.
Mr. Deputy President, I will stand on a point of order.
Thank you very much. I have ruled. Let the member
two
continue.
Administrations have managed the country during that time, and so he cannot use statistics in this way.
Senator Jean, thank you.
I'm trying my best here, Mr. President. I have not said anything about politics. and neither am I talking about which government is in power. I'm looking at our debt situation as a country, right? Now, if I had to plot a graph on the movement of debt in the country, we were at 61% below here, and it does like this. So from if the percent, it fluctuates, but then where we are now means that we have ended up higher, about at least 9 to 10 points higher than where we started back in 2012. Now, this is all the information I have before me, and that is a snapshot of 10 years. Looking at the stats, I'm not interested in who has been in power, and that's the problem, is that you're politicizing everything. So what I'm arguing is that as we seek to manage our debt, we're arguing about, we are here to debate the public debt management bill. And one of the things that have befallen us, that afflicts our country, is the persistingly high debt to GDP ratio, regardless of who's in government. Now, what I want to say to you, Mr. President, is that during that time, and if we look at individual years, there was only twice that the debt to GDP ratio would have been below what is prudential limits. So economists suggest that the ideal would be to be somewhere at 40%, 40 and 50% in your debt to GDP ratio. In the event that there is something or disaster or something wrong, then you should be at 60. That's the worst case scenario for your debt to GDP. What has happened to us as a country is that we've only been under prudential limits, very slightly under, in 2017 and 2018, and I can't really say we've been under because I'm really talking about 58.9, which says we were still hovering at prudential limits, and in 2017, 59.4, we're just really inch below prudential limits. That's in 2018. But all the other years, we have actually been above prudential limits, and that, Mr. President, suggests that there has been a certain ill health as it pertains to our fiscal situation, and a certain level of vulnerability and susceptibility to all of the things. Mr. President, there's a reason why, for example, that you find that most of our bonds are floated in the regional securities exchange. The reason why you very seldom see a St. Lucia bond being traded in the international exchange is because we would have to pay that much more interest to those in those markets, because our bonds are not very attractive to international investors. So you see most of our loans, they're coming from bilateral relationships, or they're coming from IFIs like the World Bank, or within the regional securities exchange if we went on the market, because our credit rating, which is by CARIBCRIS, is very ordinary credit rating, and that is not something that has only befallen this administration. That's something that they have inherited from 20 years ago. And so if we're going to now solve this problem, there's no quick fix. We're going to have to, there are going to be many governments that's going to look now to try to bring our fiscal situation back into line. If we were to be rated by Standard and Poor's, that most international investors would look at for a credible credit rating, we would score very, very poorly. And if, for example, I look at now what's happening in the marketplace, the central government seeks to curtail the problem of inflation, interest rates have actually gone up. And by interest rates going up, so if we had to go in the international marketplace to compete with the United States, which is a prime bond, a quality bond, it would mean, Mr. President, that we would have to pay that much more than the United States at 5.5 to borrow money, is the point. The other thing that doesn't work well for us, and challenges that we would face in the management of our debt, is the whole rating that the international community has actually used for us. And that rating that puts puts us in the middle income bracket. So, Mr. President, if you imagine, St. Lucia is rated the same way as the Chinese government is, as the Chinese economy. Because China is seen as a middle income developing country, so is St. Lucia. And that in itself has been something that I know that successive governments have been talking to the World Bank and some of the IFIs at. Now, when you are rated as a middle income country, because what they do is that they don't look at the size of your economy, and I can see the leader of government business is puzzled. Even though the Chinese economy is the second largest in the world, when you apply the GDP per capita, you would see that there are many countries above the Chinese. And so the Chinese economy it's not by any means a high income country, but it is seen as a middle income country by the international rating. And St. Lucia is in that whole setup because St. Lucia's debt to GDP ratio is within that band. Now, when you go internationally to try to borrow money from the IFIs, qualifying for concessional funding, you are not a priority. So the more highly indebted poor countries of the world are those countries, Mr. President, that get priority. So if we think that we're doing so well, we need to now compare and see the level of concessionary financing that's available to much bigger countries in Latin America and Africa. But that is so because those countries are considered to be poor and highly indebted. There was some debt forgiveness for the the highly indebted poor countries of the world recently. And the only two countries on this hemisphere that qualified was really Haiti and Guyana that benefited within the CARICOM region. None of the smaller islands of the OECS benefited, even though the size of the economy was significantly smaller and lower. So there are going to be these external challenges. The framework of the international financial community certainly is going to have a significant bearing as we try to manage our debt situation under this bill. When you juxtapose that with the demands of the domestic, social and economic conditions of our country, it means that governments are going to be walking a very tightrope, Mr. President, to satisfy the demands for better quality health care, the demands for increased infrastructure, the demands for better sporting facilities, the demands for more jobs and more programs to support various demographics of our country. So that becomes extremely difficult for governments to do. And I want to note and reemphasize again, Mr. President, that regardless of which administration is in power or which political color, you are basically dealing with a number of constraints when it comes to this whole issue of fiscal management. Now, I want to go through, Mr. President, because a lot was said about debt and borrowing. Now, I have taken stock of the various order papers made available to me during this financial year. And we have had, for example, on the 8th of June, Thursday, 8th of June, came here, we borrowed two sets of borrowings. One was for $32,100,000. The other one was to $433,500,000. Now, the government found it necessary because on that day they came and they borrowed $465,600,000. And what they found it necessary to do was to say, look, while the $32 million was to finance their budgetary requirements of the year, the 433 million they stated was to refinance existing debt. Now I raised that point. I raised that point to say that when you are refinancing existing debt, because one of the functions in the Act, under the section that deals with the debt management unit, one of their functions is to facilitate the processing of bonds, treasury bills, and government instruments. The investor who has invested in the bond, a lot of the times, Mr. President, may decide that if he takes originally a government bond, which is for about 5 years, may decide that, look, I would like, at the date of maturity, I would like to continue this bond and not call in on the bond, on the debt, or call in on the debt on the date of maturity. So then, what this says to you is that you could be in government and you are here now and you're paying someone else's bills. And that's the point I guess the government wanted to make. But what is also a fact is that you came and you also borrowed 200 million from the Saudi government. And
sorry, you have 15 minutes?
no problem. You borrowed 200 million from the Saudi government. And the term of that loan, I think it's going on for 20 years. Am I quoting you correctly? So I want to know whether the St. Lucia Labour Party believes that they're going to be in government for 20 years, that a previous United Workers' Party administration will not have to come and to also honor the commitments that you have made to the Saudi government. Now, the reason I raise that is because the thing about it, Mr. President, we all have to refinance debt. We all have to borrow debt to pay debt. And you have come here and you have borrowed 433 million to refinance existing debts. And some of this debt would go way beyond. If you do an analysis, you would be shocked as to some of what you're paying. It didn't say that all of the debt in the 433 million were to finance government bonds and treasury bills, which are shorter instruments. But what it did say is that it was to finance existing debt. So you could be counting.
Senator?
Yes, so Mr. I'm not rising on a point of order, but sometimes seeking clarification while the speaker is on his feet
Just now.
is necessary.
Do you yield?
Yes, I am a little confused as to whether the leader of opposition business is alluding to government borrowing to refinance existing debts, which we know is something that is done from time to time if you are getting a better deal on the debt, like lower interest rates, or whether he's alluding to the contracting of new debt. I'm not getting whether he's speaking of one as opposed. So can you clarify whether he's talking about the government going into additional debt or borrowing to refinance existing debt, which are not the same thing? I just want to be clear on that.
So, Anna, thank you very much.
Sorry, continue. Continue.
Sorry, Mr. President. I thank you, member, for the intervention, but the reason why I'm bringing this up, because it's necessary, because I'm hoping that by bringing this up, that we can end this ridiculous debate about this is our debt and this is your debt. It doesn't matter. At some point, we had to pay debt from an existing government. When we came in 2016, there were bonds, there were treasury bills, there were loans from previous administrations.
Mr. Deputy President,
Yes.
well, I'm not entirely satisfied, but I rise now on a point of order.
What's
and
the point of
order is relevance. What is all this talk about our debt and your debt and additional debt? We are here to talk about the public debt management bill. And I sought clarification so I could be sure that the member was being relevant but only making references that was add to his point. But he seems to be straying away from the relevance and from any connectedness to this bill which we are considering. So I want you please to ask the member to stick to the bill and remain relevant. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Fede, if you can show us the relevance of what you've just said to the bill. It's a point I was thinking of making.
And so I'm very sorry if the member was lost. Mr. President, what I want to make clear is that if we look at the functions of the debt management unit in the bill, we would see that the functions of the debt management unit is to do a number of things. It's to process government bonds, treasury bills. It's to make sure that they facilitate and coordinate government bonds and treasury bills that are coming to maturity, or issuing new certificates to investors who are deciding to roll over. And there is where the refinancing comes in. The refinancing comes in because in clauses, numerous clauses, as we speak of the functions, if you go to that section of the bill where it speaks to the functions of the debt management unit, you will see that one of their primary function is to issue new certificates to investors who have decided that they are not going to call in on a bond or a treasury bill or a government instrument, but instead is to continue. And so therefore, that would be recorded as the government then having to continue if, for example, you had a government instrument and you call in on a bond, and the government does not have the money now to pay you on your entire investment, which has now come to maturity, of you getting your money back. Then now the government has to borrow that money to pay you the debt that it owed you, and the government would have created a new debt. That's what I'm saying. So when it comes to refinancing existing debt, those are scenarios as to how that could come into play. Now, Mr. President, I must mention something about the bill directly on page 19 that I was very thankful for the AG's office to bring clarity. And page 18 in section 4, and it's really the power of the minister. And it goes on to say that the minister's powers are to appoint by an agency agreement an agent of government to facilitate in the case of various government instruments. And it goes on to list the instruments. Then if you go to B, the minister is also going to sign several functions, several on behalf of the
What section are you quoting from?
Section 4. Yeah? Page 18. Do you have it, Mr. President?
Section 4 in my version, speaks to the Debt and Investment Management Unit at section 4.
Powers of the minister. Powers of the minister, section 4. That's right. Page 18 of the bill.
There seems to be more than one version of the bill circulating.
Is that what it says in yours? Page 18? Yeah, powers of the minister. Yeah, that's where I'm on.
Because powers of the ministers, you move to 17 in this one. Oh, I'm looking at the old one.
Very mindful of the remainder of my time, Mr. President.
Sorry, I'm looking at the older one, sorry.
Oh, okay.
So continue.
Okay, so powers of the minister. So it says that A, it's to really appoint by an agency agreement an agent of government to facilitate in the case of government securities. Subsection C, 4.1 subsection C says to also authorize in writing to the Director of Finance, head of a foreign mission, to sign on his or her behalf government securities, a government guarantee, or a loan agreement. If we go over to page 19 in Section 5, where it speaks to the validity of documents signed by an agent. It says a government guarantee, government security, or other document signed by a person authorized under subsection 4 is valid as if signed by the minister. Now, there is a bit of an inconsistency here, because remember in section 4, it says that an agent is to facilitate and not to sign. And when you go on to subsection C, you see that the persons authorized to sign would be the director of finance or the head of a foreign mission. But then in the heading for subsection 5, it says validity of a document signed by an agent. Based on the legislation, an agent is to facilitate and not to sign. In the interpretation of the Act, an agent and the director of finance are two different people. So what I would suggest is maybe to change that heading to the validity of documents signed by persons authorized to sign, is what I would suggest, rather than an agent. If you put an agent, I think it's misleading and it's a bit confusing, because on the one hand, higher up says an agent is to facilitate and not to sign, and the only people that the minister can authorize to sign is the director of finance or the head of a foreign mission. So that to me is a bit confusing, and I would suggest that that be changed for clarity and consistency of the bill, in my view. Mr. President, so I was going on about monies that we've borrowed this year, and today we're borrowing 28 million. On the 8th of June, we have borrowed 465 million, and we have borrowed 200 million on the 14th of September, a total of 693 million. Now, I am not going to say that all of this borrowing is is going to be the net change in the debt. We will have to wait and see how much of it represents the refinancing and how much of it is new debt. Until we get the
Senator
figures.
Peter, you have 5 minutes.
Sure. Until we get the figures, we will see what the debt stock will change to. So there's a big difference, Mr. President, from borrowing, coming to this House and seeking approval for almost $700 million just in this year, and what the net debt stock is going to be. Now, I say that because very often I've heard figures of $1 billion being bandied around on the other side as it relates to how much in the last term the United Workers' Party borrowed. I have to make these distinctions because if we're going to talk about public debt management, and if we're going to ascribe to get to fiscal health, this cannot be economics that people pull out of a hat and they saw on Facebook and it suits the party narrative to come and to mislead people as it relates to the real financial situation of the country. We've got to be laser focused, we've got to be disciplined to ensure that our targets are met and that we're giving the right information as it pertains to our medium-term debt strategy, as it pertains to our debt analysis, government borrowings, fiscal balances, and all the various things that this bill seeks to do. So while I agree that this is a very important piece of legislation, what has to accompany such an important piece of legislation is rhetoric and narrative and public positions and pronouncements held about very important fiscal indicators of the country, that they must be rooted in empirical evidence. It is only empirical evidence that will drive this, not political rhetoric, but empirical evidence. Public debt management can only be done successfully when you are disciplined as a government, when you have an overarching plan. Very interestingly, that as the debt management unit come up with a debt management strategy, Mr. President, they have stated that they are going to take into consideration the macroeconomic conditions of the country. They're going to take into account the debt stock. They're going to take into account the GDP growth of the country, and they're going to project growth targets. And so what we see very closely aligned to debt management is GDP growth, is making sure that we have a comprehensive economic plan that's creating jobs, creating taxpayers, raising revenue. All of that comes full circle back. There is a deep correlation between all of those things and not political rhetoric. You could say whatever you want, but the price of coffee will not change when it comes to the fiscal situation of the country. We will never arrive at sound public debt management or fiscal prudency or a very good, healthy fiscal position, Mr. President, if we are not guided by empirical evidence. And so, Mr. President, I stress that as I end, that this is an important piece of legislation. This is a crucial piece of legislation, but equally important, Mr. President, is a comprehensive plan of economic growth, of generating jobs and prosperity and opportunity for people all over the country. I thank you, Mr. President.
There's a question.
Senator Shaw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy President. Mr. Deputy President, I rise in support of the Public Debt Management Bill. I note, Mr. Deputy President, that this bill is an imperative of the policy-based loan which was taken by the government of St. Lucia in 2020 from the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. This was a requirement of the loan that had to be fulfilled by the government of St. Lucia. And it's a shame, Mr. Deputy President, that 3 years later, we are here debating this bill and confusing it with debt for disaster and all sorts of things. This is debt for debt management. That is the title of the bill, Public Debt Management. And so one gets the impression that debt is taken only for disaster. And Mr. President, before I proceed to explain what I believe is the essence of the bill, I want to refer to the very same statistics that have been presented on St. Lucia's public debt from 2012 and to correctly analyze these figures so that the people of St. Lucia can understand what we are facing. Because when I went to school, I learned how to analyze statistics, and I was never taught how to just jump statistics and fly figures out in the air. So let's start with 2012. Today's Teachers Appreciation Day. And we have to appreciate what we learned from our teachers and don't come here and say something completely different, thereby confusing the people of St. Lucia. We do not have the 43%ers only as we make them out to believe. We have educated people who are listening to us, and there are some who are learning from us, and therefore we must present facts and figures correctly. So let us go from 2012. from the Economic and Social Review of 2022 at page 115. In 2012, the very same figures that were presented suggest that the official public debt to GDP stood at 61.1%. In 2013, it climbed slightly to 62.2%. In 2014, it went down slightly to 60.7%. Listen carefully, 2015, 61.5%. 2016, 60.9%. In 2017, 58.8%. In 2019, 59.4%. 2018, 59.4%. 2019, 60.3%. Listen, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, in 2020, it went to 98.1%. You didn't say why. You jumped. So do not allow me to say why. You had,
hello, members,
Mr. Deputy President.
Members, just now, Madam Senator, please address the chair if you have to say anything. Thank you.
Mr. Deputy President, I stood on a point of order to allow the member opposite to explain the statistics. He refused. He rather jumped from 2012 to 2022. Now you want to ask me why? I don't know why. Ask yourself why. In 2021, from 98.1%, it went down to 85.9%, and in 2022, went down to 69.8%. It is significant to show the various people who manage the debt throughout that term, from 2012 to 2022. Over the 10 years, while there is continuity in government, a government that is not prudent could have kept the debt at that high level. But let's move on, Madam, Mr. Deputy President. Mr. Deputy President, the policy of this bill was approved in Cabinet in October of 2020. We know the policy precedes the drafting of the bill. It was approved in 2020. Remember what happened in July 2021. So there was time from October 2020 until July 2021 for this bill to come to Parliament. Why didn't it come? An imperative of a loan that was taken, but it did not come. I cannot believe that today the opposition would come here and do not say that they're coming to support this bill as an imperative of a loan that was taken by the former administration. Mr. Deputy President, you recalled when this rapid credit facility was tapped into, the then leader of the opposition, the Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister said, and we heard the IMF had it in their reports, that that facility was created to allow for COVID relief. But he said, the president of the IMF said, build roads. You remember that? The people of St. Lucia did not directly benefit from the facility that was taken from the IMF.
Mr. President, I stand on a point of order. That is,
Senator Fede, what's your point of order?
the member is again misleading the House by suggesting that the people of St. Lucia did not benefit from the loan of the IMF. Mr. President, I can tell you, and you were very well, as the chairman of the command center back then, what I can tell you is that while there were 11,000 registered employees of the NIC who were able to tap those funds, there were another 6,000 unregistered people, taxi drivers, hairdressers, and the like, of small business people who did not have the ability
Mr. President,
to
is he
benefit
offering
from the
clarification? I
NIC.
did not ask for
Just now,
clarification.
What we did,
Senator
Mr.
Jean?
Yeah.
Thank you.
What we did,
But
Mr.
just now,
President.
Senator Fede,
Yeah.
she is correct, but you have not said exactly what your point of order is. You're going into a great
No, I
explanation.
said she was misleading the House by
Yes.
saying they're not benefiting from the monies.
Yes, but you haven't said why that is wrong. You've
It is
gone into a
wrong.
very long.
Some-
Just now, Senator.
Yeah.
You've gone into a very long explanation without getting to the point of what exactly is wrong about what she said. So if
Okay.
you could just summarize
Sure.
what you were saying.
No problem. So where she's wrong is that there were an additional 6,000 people who benefited from the monies we borrowed from the World Bank, right? For income support. That's the point.
Thank you. Can you move on with your presentation, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy President. Mr. Deputy President, the Prime Minister at the time tapped a facility for the people of St. Lucia. The people of St. Lucia will tell you whether they benefited or not. Well, I agree. The people of St. Lucia told you whether they got it or not. That was on July 26, 2021. Mr. President, when I look at this bill called the Public Debt Management Act, I see a bold and courageous government who would bring this bill to Parliament. And let me tell you why. The first thing is that there are reporting requirements to Parliament. It means that the Minister of Finance now has to come to Parliament and bring that report on the debt of this country. So that when loan agreements are signed, but they never came into this house, no motions came into this house, and all the DFCs that have been created, the design, finance, construct, or if we want to call them design, finance, build facilities that were created supposedly to build roads that are unaccounted for, this bill says they must come inside of it. Because, Mr. Deputy President, the people of St. Lucia must understand that this August chamber, both the lower and the upper house, is accountable to them for the debt of this country. And so we cannot have roads being built like the one at Rodney Bay for $15 million and it doesn't see the light of the hair. Less than 2 miles of road. Sidewalk aleze. Chimekwaze. Thanks to the representative for Grozile, I understand, who used his CDP funds to give some reprieve by doing a little layer of asphalt on the road that takes you behind Baywalk Mall. Madam, Mr. Deputy President, the people of St. Lucia must understand that when we pay taxes, when we pay VAT, when we pay the health and security levy, it is supposed to be managed effectively on their behalf.
That's right.
Not to come and cry for them for the 2.5%, but to account for the $15 million in roads, to account for the $42 million in playing fields, to account for the $118 million for the box, and many others for Pomando and Ernst & Young and all of these things. That is the debt. That is the bill that will cause the people of St. Lucia to understand what is happening with their money. Mr. Deputy President, I want to turn to Section 12 of this Act, which is, according to my document, is on page 23. And it outlines the debt management objectives. Excuse me. It says, the minister shall cause the unit, which is the debt management unit, to prepare debt management objectives to ensure that the financing needs of the government are met on a timely basis. Ça veut dire, c'est mon qui a dit dans debt management unit, and these people are made up of the Director of Finance, the PS Finance, there are a number of people, the Accountant General, the Director of Audit, a lot of people who were bypassed before. They now are going to create a plan for the Minister of Finance, okay, to see the debt needs. Also, the debt service obligations of the government are met at the lowest possible cost over the medium to long term in a manner that is consistent with an acceptable and prudent degree of risk. You know that what that will prevent, Mr. Deputy President? A contract which says that interest will be paid at 1% per day, even before the loan is disbursed. This is going to prevent that. Never again that must happen. You want to raise the dead? We can raise the dead. Do not allow me to raise the dead. Kill it. Government debt management activities support the establishment of a well-developed domestic debt market in the medium to long term. And government debt is managed in a manner that is consistent with general principles of responsible fiscal management. For the leader of opposition business to come and talk Rochamel today, when he was an employee of Sandals, really says that your narrative is dead. The people who are benefiting today, Dio, même si mon ayo buy $24 million concessions, pas ça? Waiver. Après ça, vous voulez parler Rochamel? Ou pas, where's your Pani Powell? Pani Hote. So, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, I have seen certain DFCs. I worked in the Ministry of Infrastructure where we had interest rates at 6% and all kinds of things, and I kept asking, have we done a comparison between the DFCs at 6% and a CDB loan, for example, or a World Bank loan at 2%, at 3%? Jodia, we have 0.75%. Mr. Vice President, Mr. Deputy President, this bill is going to cure a lot of the nonsense, a lot of the squandering that we saw in the past administration. Mr. Deputy President, before I came up this morning, the media stopped me, and one question that the media asked me was, okay, you all are going to pass this bill, but what happens if another administration repeals the bill? And I said, well, it's the people of St. Lucia who has to stop this. The people of St. Lucia must understand that they have a responsibility to ensure that the government that they have elected, does what is best in the interest of the people. And don't allow it just to the few of us who are here. But we have to now be ready to protest and to do what it takes to ensure that bills like that remain on the books of the government of St. Lucia. Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, I want to go on to section 18 of the bill, where it says the constitution of the committee, that's the Public Debt Management Advisory Committee. Look at that, Mr. Deputy President. It's made up of the Director of Finance, who is the chairperson, the Permanent Secretary, who is the deputy, and I take it Permanent Secretary in the Department of Finance, the Permanent Secretary in the Department of Economic Development, the Deputy Director of Finance, Debt and Investment, the Director of Research and Policy, the Accountant General, the Budget Director, and the Solicitor General. Let's go further. Section 19. The functions of the committee are: 1. To consider proposals for new and existing government debt, to review the strategy and borrowing plan, to provide guidance on the terms and conditions of project-related financing to ensure consistency with the strategy, to review the composition of the government debt portfolio and portfolio performance, including performance of key risk indicators, strategic benchmarks, and exogenous risk factors, to identify the circumstances under which the strategy must be reviewed, including significant movements in markets or government finances outside specified ranges, to review documents for publication, including the strategy, borrowing plan, and any other reports to Parliament, and to carry out other functions incidental to the proper discharge of the functions under paragraphs A to F. What I find very curious, Mr. Deputy President, is that the Minister of Finance now has to let me get the section. Could you believe that the person who is the boss of the country would have to submit his proposal for financing to that committee? Could you imagine? The Minister of Finance, who usually is the Prime Minister, now has to submit his proposal for financing to this committee for approval, for review, for analysis. A Minister of Finance who I have seen in the past, a former Minister of Finance, just writing a letter and say, "This is my selected contractor." A Minister of Finance who just writes an agency and say, "I have secured a loan of $175 million for Euronaura International Airport." No committee, no scrutiny. Or shall by equity effect.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. In keeping with the standing orders and the proceedings of the Senate, I wish to suspend Standing Order 9.3 to allow the Senate to sit between the hours of 6 and 7 p.m. or 7 in the evening.
Honorable Senators, the question is that Standing Order 9.3 or 9.3, be suspended to enable this Senate to sit beyond the prescribed time of 6 o'clock in the afternoon. I now put the question. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as have contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Please continue, Senator Jean.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy President. I didn't even realize that was the time. Yes, so Mr. Deputy President, this bill is a very strict piece of legislation that will allow for improved debt management of the public's funds. It's a piece of legislation that will allow for transparency, for greater monitoring, for greater accountability of the people's money. Mr. Deputy President, it ought to prevent loan agreements stating contractors and where money is supposed to be diverted outside of the consolidated fund for our projects. It is supposed to prevent, because all that is debt. It's supposed to prevent monies from going to places in South America and other places. It's supposed to prevent contractors listed without any form of competitive bidding. Mr. Deputy President, I sat as Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Infrastructure, and I had to negotiate with the Kuwait Fund, with the World Bank, asking whether they could reduce the criteria for selection of contractors so that our local contractors would be allowed to bid, to compete. We had the Feed and Agriculture Roads Project. We had the Cashridge-Grozile Highway Project. And we were successful in getting the Kuwait Fund to allow local participation, because based on the packages of roads that they wanted, our local contractors would not have been able to compete. They did not have the resources to compete. And we were successful in getting them to break some of the packages down so that our local contractors can compete. But we did not ask them to send money somewhere in contractors' hands before the project could have been completed or drawn down. We did not do that. The St. Lucia Labour Party government did not do that. So by a process of elimination, check for yourself. So therefore, Mr. President, in fact, before I go there, what we don't realize, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, is our sovereignty and how we erode our sovereignty when we allow multilateral agencies and people from outside to come and dictate to us what we should do. I always told the staff of the Ministry of Infrastructure, even though this is World Bank money, is World Bank money, is CDB money, is this money and that money, no. We are taking loans from these agencies. It is the people of St. Lucia's money. And therefore, we can dictate what we want with our money. This thing of bowing down to multilateral agencies, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, and then we do whatever we want with the people's money, we need to stop that. Our sovereignty is king, and we have to respect it. And before any loan agreement is signed, it ought to be properly scrutinized to ensure that we have control of what we're doing. This thing of dancing to contractors, let it was Vini. Yes, 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 sir, yes, sir. And then we're doing whatever we want with the people money. We need to stop it. So, Mr. Vice President, Deputy President, I will reiterate that the bill strongly reflects the high level of courage of the administration of the St. Lucia Labour Party. It has within it transparent conditions and systems of accountability. And it shows the prudent fiscal management that the government has been showing over the last 2 years. They are steering the economy in a positive direction, and no one can say otherwise. They can take statistics and make them jump and make it leap, but they cannot bypass what is already done. And it shows you that Honorable Philip Joseph Pierre, Prime Minister of St. Lucia, could have taken a deficit and turned it around to a surplus in just about a year. And so I have every confidence that armed with the proper legislation and sound fiscal management principles, that our country is going in the right direction. But I just want the people of St. Lucia to be vigilant, and they should not allow any other administration to come and take us back to the wilderness where we came from. This squandering of our funds must not happen again. And now they want to come now and say, oh, they should bring back VAT to 15%. I mean, we are a yo-yo. We're sounding as if we're in a circus, just jumping up, jumping down, jumping up, jumping down, moving a goalpost like I heard somebody saying, from short to tall, from long to whatever, from big to small. From square to round. I couldn't even understand what they're talking about. Very same people who had doctrines that speak to, if you don't support the philosophy of the party, you should not get anything in your constituency. But now you want to come and talk about goalpost shifting. There is no shifting of the goalpost. The goalpost is steady. What we've seen are goals, one behind the other. Tutti mama isa hen laptop se jousa. Pregnant mothers can go and get their ultrasounds and their blood tests free of charge. 80 plus people can get their free medication. That is the goal. These are the goals that we shoot in. Yonder a lot. Touching every single sector of our society. Next month, pensioners, look out. Christmas in November. They're talking about increase for civil servants. Someone now, civil servants done negotiating their salary already. Look out, the civil servants. Salary negotiations on the way. And they're talking about having it even quicker, having it resolved. Hurry up and resolve your salary issues. The government ready? We have teachers getting their materials allowance. Fire service going to get equipment, training, mentoring, all of these things coming for them. Police officers, they Siemens passe, you hand drones at bagay.
Tuesday.
Scanners for customs. I mean, people, how much more, Mr. Deputy President, should we be asking for? We want more. We want more. That reminds me of an ad they had before for vodka. More money, more this, more that. Right? But Mr. Deputy President, we are seeing a country that is steered in the right direction. I just have one more observation to make. You know, just recently there, from last year, even on a cultural side, there is a greater awareness of our culture and our pride.
Senator Joy, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. So I will not take all, even though Senator Aziz gave me his. Last year's emancipation celebrations gave me a jolt of my heritage, of my ancestry, that I decided, no, I have to go and look and buy African clothes. Now it's only African clothes I want to wear. That is the awareness that has come to me. I bought this pink jacket for me to celebrate Lawas. Etale Naitune Ble. For me celebrate Marguerite. That is what we are getting now. There is a better sense of national pride in our country. Before we used to say Bajans are like to, Bajans were proud people, but just at least c'est juste tout just at least yes, the cultural consciousness. Proud St. Lucians, I'm a proud St. Lucian. I will go and I will sell St. Lucia anywhere. I could not do that a few years ago. Tout le passé, si on roule, si on chicane, si on bagay. Now I can do it. There is a greater sense of national pride, and we all must share that national pride. So, Mr. Deputy President, I support fully. Now, I have one more thing to say. I worked in the public service and I know I transcended administrations. I worked with Sir John Compton. I worked with Honorable Louis George. I worked with Honorable Kenny Anthony, Stephenson King, Philip J. Pierre. Yola J. But it don't matter. Yet still, like Mayor Angelo says, I rise. Public officers feel more empowered, and that one you can take it to the bank. They feel more empowered under a Labour administration. And so you see that bill? All of them will take it, and they will make sure they scrutinize it. Okay? But I hope that it is not used to block progressive development. That is what I'm hoping. I'm asking that it is used in the right way so that we do not block, we do not stymie, we do not prevent development of this country. The Prime Minister is bold to be able to pass this bill. Let us use it in the right way. I thank you, Mr. Deputy President.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President, and I thank the members who have contributed to this bill. Like was mentioned when the bill was presented, this is a very bold and courageous piece of courageous step for the government to have come to this House to pass this piece of legislation, and it will need the support of all parties, particularly, like was just mentioned, the public servants who are the custodians of our public purse and who are accountable and responsible, really, not accountable, but responsible for implementing the policies and to make sure that the legislation works. Mr. Deputy President, it is very clear that a little something has been learnt by the leader of opposition business, to whom I mostly have to respond since he was the only member of the team to have spoken. The leader of opposition business has clearly understood that his time in this chamber is precious. So he takes every second of his time, which I think is commendable. And I must say that the time that the independent did not give up or did not use was not only given up to the speaker here, it was given up, I think, to all speakers. But what is significant is not just the amount of time you use in this chamber, but what you use the time to do. And I still feel we have debated 3 different issues today, 2 motions and a bill, and the pattern has not changed. So this time around, I intend to be very brief because the arguments presented did not warrant a lot for me to chew on, because they really, the question I was trying to figure out in my mind while the opposition was presenting was whether you support the bill or not. In fact, I very guardedly, because you had instructed us to avoid a lot of the crosstalk, I tried to whisper across to my colleague and say to him, do you, Mr. Deputy, I tried to ask him, do you or do you not support the bill? Because I was curious about what posture the opposition would take, particularly with this public finance management bill. Were they going to come to the Senate today? Because in the lower house, the leader of the opposition was absent as usual. The other member of parliament in the lower house was there but was absent when that bill was presented. So I did not get an impression as to what the position of the opposition was on that particular bill. And having presented the bill this morning, looking at the contents of the bill and the conduct of the opposition then in government, I could not see a relationship or a favoring or any similarity between their practice and what this bill was saying. So I was extremely curious as to what the leader of opposition business in the Senate would have said, or how he would have postured. But up to this minute, I am still I'm yet to hear the utterance from the opposition that they support this bill. So if you do not say that you support it, spent an entire presentation, went around the world, but to this minute, you have not said that you support the public finance management, debt management bill. So it leaves me to assume, therefore, Mr. Deputy President, that the opposition does not support the bill. And if a responsible opposition, and those of us who follow the parliamentary procedure, the chairperson of the Public Finance, the Public Accounts Committee, the PAC, is the leader of the opposition. I believe that the standing orders, the Constitution recognizes the importance of that particular role. It is not a government person, a government rep, who is the chair of the public.
Mr. President, I stand in the point of order.
Sorry, what's your point of order?
The leader of the opposition is misleading the House. Leader of government business, soon to be leader of opposition business. But, Mr. President, I wouldn't be long. By stating that the opposition does not support the bill, at no time any of us said that. We have stated all through the presentation, it's a very important bill. It is my constitutional right to frame my discussion however I want. The leader of government business will not tell me what to say, and the leader of government business will not infringe upon my constitutional right.
Well, except
the
that
opposition has said,
in fairness to the leader of government business,
yeah,
you didn't state a position.
No, we stated it's a very
yes, you said it's an important bill,
legislation.
but you didn't state yes you support or no you don't support in any definitive way.
So it's a very important piece of legislation of which we are very familiar with, and we were very happy to be part of the construction of the policy thrust for the bill.
So, like, but that, so precisely. So then you can't rise on a point of order if you have chosen not to put your position forward. When he say he's left to assume, that's an assumption he's entitled to make. He didn't say you didn't support it. He said he has to assume that because you've not exactly.
May I proceed?
Please continue.
Mr. Deputy President, you see the semantics coming out, and I knew that I'm an old-fashioned teacher. You know, when you want to evoke certain responses from your students, you just have to make certain stimulating statements, and the things they don't want to say, they say it. So, Mr. Deputy President, it is very clear that the opposition refuses to say that they support the bill. They refuse. And until now, this opposition has not stated that they support the bill. And let it be stated in these records, in the records of this Parliament, that the St. Lucia Labour Party government on the 5th of October 2023 came to this house, came to this chamber, presented a public debt management bill that is supposed to safeguard the way in which the finances of this country is used. This bill did not originate from the St. Lucia Labour Party. This is something that is a requirement that is set outside of our jurisdiction, that we as responsible governments need to engage or embrace. And this opposition today has refused to state emphatically that they support this bill. And therefore, Mr. Deputy President, just as I respect the opposition member's right to his constitutional right to state his position as he wishes, my constitutional right to state my position as I wish is that I am left to assume that since you do not state that you support and you are silent, I am left to assume that your silence means that you don't support. That is my assumption. Now, Madam, Mr. Deputy, I don't know why they're making a case about support or not, because you could have said so. So let's move forward. And therefore, Mr. Deputy President, it appears that this bill is not in sync with the DNA of the opposition.
That's right.
It's foreign to them. And so when it comes, they don't want to touch this. This is not aligned to what we are made of. The fabric of our philosophy is not in line with this bill. So this government of the St. Lucia Labour Party on this side, we emphatically state that we support the bill. We support it. Let it be known in the records that we support it. And so, Mr. Deputy President, I want to touch on a couple of things that the leader of opposition business mentioned. He pointed out that we have had about a 20-year period of consistent deficit. But you see, again, he has a way of being very selective in stating his facts. And like I said earlier, keeping certain figures away. And so since he has mentioned deficit, I want to remind and state here that finally, under this government, in a year, we have realized a surplus. And not just a surplus,
Mr. President,
but a primary surplus.
What is your point of order, Senator Fede?
The member is misleading the House. The substantive balance is the overall balance. And the overall balance for the last 20 years have been negative. I'm sorry. Don't mislead the people.
No, but again, Senator Fede, I think perhaps he preempted you and corrected, well, not corrected, clarified that what he was saying, it's a primary surplus, which I believe is correct. So continue, Senator Fede.
Well, you see, again, Mr. Deputy, it has happened again. You see, he doesn't allow me to complete the statement. And I know he's going to come, and it happens over and over. I don't know, in the very same way the opposition has not learned that there are certain things they should never do again, because the people of St. Lucia has voted, they keep doing the same thing. He's not learning, Mr. Deputy. I'm disappointed. He's not learning. Mr. Deputy President, I don't know what is misleading about the fact that I just stated. So, Mr. Deputy President, the primary surplus, yes. He was on his feet before I even said the word. But I'll say it so that the records have it. Yes, the primary surplus. And so this government, because of that, we have been able now to say to our public servants, our retirees, our pensioners, our teachers, that we can put in a little something extra at the end of certain months, that we can give you your TMA, teacher materials allowance. That is why the government is comfortable that when we manage the economy well and we cut down on the deficit and there is any surplus, we're not going to take it and send it anywhere. We're going to spend it on the people of this country. So, Mr. Deputy President, there was a point made about borrowing, and it is true that every government will borrow, and every government is responsible for paying the debts of its predecessors. But there is a very essential, fundamental difference between what you are paying the debt for. It's just not paying debt. Mr. Deputy President, down the road, whatever government it is, 20 years from now, 18 years from now, I would much rather know that I am paying a debt of $200 million because $200 million was borrowed to make sure that my country had a hospital that had not been completed in 14 years. That I can say that I took $200 million to give my people a hospital, than for me to have to be paying for, now I don't want to mention names, but to be paying for DFCs, for roads or road that had to be built to facilitate a horse race track that has not brought 1 cent to my country.
That's right.
13 million?
Yeah.
And the list goes on and on. So while I agree in principle that governments will have to inherit the debts of governments previous to them, it is what you have to pay that is the issue. So when the member attempts to talk about debt and who borrowed and who has borrowed and not borrowed, I think it is imperative that we clearly state the difference. And every time there is an attempt by the opposition to mislead and they are caught, they are quick to say that's politics. So when they are doing the mischief,
Yes.
and you catch them,
Yes.
oh, that's politics.
Yes.
But when the opposition catches them, then they say that we're being political. Well, I'll say something here, Mr. Deputy President. This chamber, you know, aside from two persons here who are independent, this chamber is occupied by politicians. All of us here are politicians. So when you come into this chamber, you expect the discussion to have political flavor. Now, it doesn't have to be low class and bantering and mepui, because that's not my style. But we are politicians. We contest elections. So do not categorize a criticism as political while you call yours, it's just politics. I don't know the difference. So, Mr. Deputy President, there was an assertion that $465 billion was borrowed by this government, and an attempt to give us a long a long history on economics, a long lecture on economics, and quoting China and all kinds of strange examples. I wish to make it very clear, Mr. Deputy President, that this government, in its 2 years, the majority of the funds that we have had to borrow is being used or has to be used to pay for the debt incurred on this country, on our citizens, by the government that was led by the United Workers' Party. The $465 billion that he jumped on, I can tell you that most of that money is being used to pay previous, to finance previous
Mr. President,
government debts.
I have to.
Senator Vede?
Previous governments or the government of the United Workers' Party? Because I rise on a point of order. He's misleading the House by saying that most of the money is borrowed is to finance the debts of the previous United Workers' Party. That's wrong. If we look carefully at the debt servicing, you will see that a lot of the debt taken
Mr.
by the
Vice
UWP are debt with moratorium.
Mr. Vice President,
Yes.
And so,
the member has not
And so-
indicated what he's standing on.
Senator,
Why he's
misleading the House.
interrupting.
He's misleading the
Senator.
House. Just sit down.
No.
Hello?
Members, let me caution you again. I think we've had a very long day, and spirits are getting a little higher than they need to be. Please conduct yourself appropriately. Address the chair. You rose on a point of order, and we're asking what the point of order is. So if you can just state that clearly.
So thank you, Mr. President. The point of order is that the member is misleading the House by saying that the majority of the monies that they have borrowed is to finance debt by the United Workers' Party administration in the previous years. I put it to him that the facts don't show that, because when you look at the simple fact that you've borrowed almost $700 million. Now, when you came on the day, and I think I had the date down.
Senator Peredo, it's
Yeah.
not an attempt for you to make a new presentation.
No, but he cannot back it up.
Right, so you've made that point?
He has no figures. It's going way back.
Right,
the
so you've
fact
made-
is going way back.
So you've made that point. So
he needs to correct that.
So, Senator Ferdinand, unless you can substantiate what you said with the breakdown, I would ask you to move on.
Mr. Deputy President, it's a very interesting evening. And I just saw the leader of opposition business. It looks like it's in the DNA now. The term way back. I think somebody was saying that a certain prime minister was way better than Sir John Compton. And you know, this is kind of beginning, it's getting a little bit comical now. So I will move on, Mr. Deputy. I'll move on. I'll tell you what is a fact. The monies that we've borrowed thus far, almost all of the loans have a moratorium. It means that we have not started paying for them. That's a fact. Whether it's a moratorium of 5 years, 3 years, 2 years. So it means that this government has not started to pay a single cent to finance debts that we would have taken. Okay? We were not in government between 2016 and 2021. So we would not have borrowed money then. And it is very clear, Mr. Deputy President, that within those years, if you have to look at a summary of just some of the periods, say ahead of the COVID period, between 2016 and 2019, when there was no COVID, over $300 million were borrowed. By whom? Could not have been by the St. Lucia Labour Party. And that debt is being financed on service right now. Now, while I don't want to get, you see, the leader of opposition business is not, he knows what he's doing. He's trying to get into a whole argument on figures and to try to, you know, tie up this is my rebuttal. He's not going to dictate how I do it. So what I will do instead is to establish certain basic facts that are not disputable. For example, the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party today, every month we have to pay debts. We are not paying for any of the monies that we borrowed thus far. The government then, that he was part of, it's a fact that prior, and everything is COVID. COVID made us do everything. COVID made us call people names. COVID made us do all of that. Before 2020, this government had borrowed in excess of $300 billion. And then, after or during the COVID period, when the IMF made the facility available, we know what happened. They just went crazy. And I remember the then Prime Minister saying, I'm proud to be able to borrow. I didn't know how being able to borrow makes you proud. Nobody wants to borrow. You would prefer if you didn't have to borrow. It was such a big, it was such a, you know, it was like a spree. And today I am referring to the government of the day having to service debt incurred by the previous government, and that becomes an issue of contention. Mr. Deputy President, I believe also that the present opposition has tried to evade the issue of mismanagement, the issue of recklessness, and the issue of being irresponsible. I mean, we have to face it. And I think it is time for them to reconcile, level with the people of this country. They have made the decision and they have elected another government. You have an opportunity, level with them. You know, just level with the people. They have elected you before, they have changed governments before, just level with them. This whole masking of what is reality is not going to work. And we have at times had to say to the people, we did it that way, we don't think it was correct, we have come back to you. Look at how many times we've come here to amend legislation. You know why, Mr. Deputy? Because certain sectors speak to us, certain groups raise concerns, and we have to come back, as the Prime Minister sometimes says, swallow your spit, come back and say, you know what, we didn't get it right, and so we are coming back to fix it. That's okay. But you see the arrogance, the pompous attitude that we can do no wrong and we're always on the right side. And when we've done wrong, it's not our fault, it's somebody else's fault. We need to change that. None of us is absolute and perfect. We need to change that. There is nothing wrong in saying that we are responsible for what is this government inherited. That's a fact. That is a fact. You can't dispute that. Mr. Deputy President, there was a very significant point raised by one of my colleagues here when, in the discussion, she made reference to how what we're doing in terms of following the precepts and the principles of this piece of legislation is in line with what our government wants to achieve for our people. And I think I want to identify myself. I want to identify with that statement. Because it really is, like I said, it's not in the DNA of the opposition, but it is in the DNA of the St. Lucia Labour Party to have these principles. And it is consistent with some of what we've done. As a people, we want to rebuild this country. There has been a lot of division, a lot of anger, a lot of political tribalism, a lot of these things that have come into the fray. And I think at this time we need to move away from that. And when the reference was made to the issue of consciousness and the identity of our people, I want to identify with that. That the conversation today is different. The conversation today is about making this society one that is more united, one that seeks to observe principles like what this particular piece of legislation is seeking to do. Doing things right, being honest, speaking the truth. Emancipation, as you were saying, is a symbol of our identity, what we represent, who we are as a people. Our Creole festivals, this morning we acknowledge Moi Heritage Creole. It reflects who we are. And I think it is much better. The people of this country can relate to what we're doing because they don't have to put up with any ideology that is foreign, Canadian with an accent, and making reference to all kinds of things that people do not relate to, and quote unquote dissing some of the institutions in this country that represent what we stand for. So this bill, Mr. Deputy President, what this bill is asking you to do as a government and as a people is to apply the principles of good governance, to apply the principles of accountability, when it comes to the use of public funds. It has made recommendations, or it has enshrined in it certain practices and procedures that will ensure that corrupt government cannot survive.
That's true.
That is what it's doing. No corrupt government will be able to survive based on the principles of this act. And our government is very comfortable with that, because we have our operations and our thinking is in line with those kinds of practices. So even without this piece of legislation, we were already aligning ourselves with that kind of practice. So it's almost natural that you can embrace it. You know, it's like a child who comes from a home where people greet people, they respect the rules or the laws of the household, they know they have to clean their room, they understand order. When they go to school, it's easy. They greet their teacher. They know when they sharpen their pencil, they must throw it in the bin. They know when it's time for it's recess, they go to the washroom. You know, they put their hand up to ask a question. When they are corrected, they accept it. It's natural. That child is going to adjust because that is part of their own upbringing. The Labour Party philosophy can relate to that, because that's part of our DNA, to be accountable, to explain things to people, and to give an account of what we do with the people's money. So this bill, we can come here and say openly that we support it. But now I know, Mr. Deputy President, now we know why this opposition cannot stand in this house and open their mouth and say they support the bill. Now I know. I waited and I waited, and I challenged the leader of opposition business early in my rebuttal to stand up and say he supported the bill. But he cannot do it. It is not in his DNA. It is not in the DNA of his party. It is not in their philosophy to support something that demands that kind of accountability. And so he has failed. The opposition and the United Workers' Party have failed. With an opportunity today to stand up and make a declaration in public to the people of St. Lucia that we support a public debt management bill. And even when he stood up and did all of his theatrics, he refuses to say it. And that, to me, represents the essence of what the opposition over there represents. And so, Mr. Deputy President, I want to differentiate between those of us on this side and those of us on that side. I want to differentiate. I completely differentiate. We on this side are in sync with the philosophy of good governance and public accountability. And we can once again identify with this piece of legislation. And I want to categorically state that on the records of today's sitting, the opposition United Workers' Party did not, refused to, and could not see that they support a public debt finance bill and good governance. That represents good governance. And so, whether they want to accuse me of saying that they don't, whether they can posture and gesture, it is clearly stated now that there is a vast difference between the two groups. And I would prefer to be on this side and support this particular. And I urge the people of St. Lucia and around the world who are listening and following this debate to understand that we are dealing with a difference of principle. We are dealing with something that is essential. Our financiers, those we are going to approach to borrow, those who have ensured that this legislation is available, they are listening. And so they understand that this government respects and appreciates this. And that there is another group that seems to have very little to do with that philosophy. I leave that to the people of St. Lucia to deal with one day down the road. So, Mr. Deputy President, I once again reaffirm this government's position on this bill, and I look forward to its passing and for the benefits that it will bring to our public servants, to our St. Lucian folk, and to ensure that our public debt management and our level of accountability and transparency is always on par with the expectations of the international community and with the expectations of the people of our country. I thank you.
Honorable Senators, the question is that the Public Debt Management Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to consolidate and modernize the laws relating to debt management by providing for the administration of public debt management, a medium-term debt management strategy, a public debt sustainability analysis, government borrowings, guarantees on lending, and to reduce multiple issuers of debt and ensure sound financial policies in relation to the management of public debt and related matters. The same thing happens now.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 3.
Act binds the Crown.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 1, clauses 4 to 22.
Administration.
So, Mr. President, this is where I would like to point out in Section 5. So, in Section 4 of the bill, it says that the ministers, when it speaks to the powers of the minister, it goes on to say that you've got an agent, yeah? The minister can actually appoint by an agency agreement an agent of government to facilitate in the case of securities issuance registration. So in the case of an agent, it says to facilitate. Then it goes on to say B, the minister can sign, and then C, the minister can authorize the director of finance or the head of a foreign mission to sign on his or her behalf. Now you have to know the difference between the finance director and the head of foreign government. They can be authorized by the minister to sign. But when it comes to the agent in subsection A, it's to facilitate and not to sign. Are you with me? Yeah? Now, when we go on to section 5, subheading validity of the document signed by an agent. So, on the one hand, we have the agent facilitating, and then this subheading could be grossly inconsistent and misleading when it says that the agent can sign, because in the meat of the legislation it doesn't say that. So maybe that needs to change, that heading, to persons authorized or signed by persons authorized in accordance with section 4 or whatever. You're the lawyer, but I think it needs to address. In interpretation of the bill, the director of finance and the agent are totally different people.
Mr. Chairman, I think...
Sorry, yes, go ahead.
I think perhaps Senator...
Can't hear you.
Fede,
Yeah,
I think perhaps the leader of opposition business, Senator Fede, has maybe done a bit of inadvertent leapfrogging, which is what causes the problem. Because if he were, for example, I noticed that he has read section 4, subsection 1, the powers of the minister, A, to appoint by an agency agreement an agent of government to facilitate in the case of government securities, and it gives issuance, registration, management, redemption, and repayment. But if we look at subsection or clause, I'm not sure which one, C, it says to authorize in writing the director of finance or head of a foreign mission, not of a foreign country. We can have an ambassador plenipotentiary, as they're called, our ambassador to the United Nations, who is authorized to sign on his or her behalf government securities, a government guarantee, or a loan agreement. Now, this is nothing new. Our ambassadors extraordinary and plenipotentiary have from times immemorial been authorized to sign, but it is understood that they do that under the explicit authorization of the minister responsible. I think some years ago we had some little hassle over what was called the Hellenites building in New York. But it was not that the ambassador would not have been authorized to do it, but he needed a specific and explicit authorization to transfer the ownership of the building. So when you go over to the other one about the government security, it says a government guarantee, government security, or other document signed by a person authorized under Section 4.1 is valid as if signed by the minister. In other words, the minister has assigned or delegated the responsibility which he legally and constitutionally holds. He has delegated it to an agent, and it mentions the agent as being either the director of finance or the head of a foreign mission. Not a foreign, no, you don't delegate to the head of a country. You don't tell the Taiwanese president he can sign on our behalf. What you're saying is that our ambassador in Taiwan, for example, when authorized by the minister, can act on behalf of the minister, and that agreement has a binding force as if it was signed by the minister himself.
Well, we're not supposed to have a back and forth too much on it, but yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think everything you're saying is in line with what I'm saying, but I'm saying look at the heading now of Section 5, where it says validity of the document signed by an agent. So, as you've correctly stated, Honorable Member, in the case of an agent, based on everything we have read so far, that it is meant for an agent to facilitate and not to sign. But as you've correctly stated, constitutionally, ambassadors and the director of finance, the minister can delegate his powers to them. But what I'm saying to you, an agent is somebody totally different. An agent refers to a bank that's processing a government security or a bond. It refers to a financial broker like First Citizens Bank, for example, comes to mind, that they are facilitating the bonds and the various government instruments. And based on the legislation that you've put before us, it is not the intention for the minister to authorize them to sign, because it's not written here. But I'm just saying that if you have validity of documents signed by agent, based on the interpretation section of the Act, an agent is something totally different from the director of finance, and also completely different from the foreign mission. So for consistency, all I'm saying is remove that word and let agent reflect, replace it with persons authorized to sign.
Mr. Deputy President, I just have one other point. In light of what the Leader of Opposition Business is saying, if we go back to the interpretation section, Section 2, agent means a person who is appointed under Section 4.1a. I kind of understand what he's saying. And 4.1a suggests that 4.1c are not agents.
So I understand what the Honorable Senator Fede is saying in terms of the chapeau for the section. And perhaps, yes, the chapeau could have been and should have been better drafted, but the operative part, which is the wording of Section 5 itself, is actually fine. So it does not impact the operation of the bill. The persons who are entitled to sign would be those authorized under 4.1c, which is the Director of Finance, Head of Foreign Mission, and the Head of Foreign Mission. So, as I understand what you're getting at, Senator Fede, it would have been nice if we had the drafter here to assist in changing it. But like I said, it would not affect the validity of Section 5.
Correct, Mr. Deputy. In fact, that discussion started a little earlier, informally, and the drafter then had clearly explained the difference between what is in Section 4.1a, which is what who the minister appoints and who the agents are, and what occurs in 1c as to specify who can sign. And that was clearly distinct. So I think it's not that one causes the other, but there are two different functions there. So I think that would have, as you correctly said, taken care of the issue.
Thank you. So I appreciate the interventions. Where was I? So yes. So Part 1 stands part of the bill. Aye. Part 2, clauses 23 to 38.
Government borrowing.
Part 2, clauses 23 to 38 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 3, clauses 39 to 51.
Government guarantees.
Part 3, clauses 39 to 51 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 4, clauses 52 to 62.
Government on lending.
Part 4, clauses 52 to 62 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 5, clauses 63 to 69.
Miscellaneous.
Part 5, clauses 63 to 69 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 1.
Short title and commencement.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Honorable Senators, the question is that the committee rises and the bill re-reported. I now put the question. As many are of that opinion, say aye.
Aye.
As many are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. But not yet. Honorable Senators, I beg to report that the Public Debt Management Bill went through committee stages without amendments. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Deputy President, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and that the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honorable Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Public Debt Management Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many are of that opinion, say aye.
Aye.
As many are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the King's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Public Debt Management Act 2023. This act shall come into force on a date to be fixed by the Minister by order published in the Gazette.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Deputy President, I move that the Senate do stand adjourned, sine die.
Senators, the question is that this Senate, do stand adjourned, sine die. I now put the question. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting adjourned.
All rise.
Sénat aujourd'hui avec discussion était très intéressant au cas où là nous fini, ça pas normal pour ça être fini autant de temps, puisque normalement, nous pour finir avant 6 heures. Mais chef face au gouvernement, nous pour demander permission pour continuer après 6 heures. Et discussion aujourd'hui, c'était particulièrement à d'émotion et qui ont des émotions. C'était pour prêter ça c'est 9 971 000 dollars américains pour aider, assister et puis opération service d'effet. Et aussi l'autre là, c'était pour prêter ça c'est 6 276 000 dollars américains pour aider un programme ça s'appelle économie jeunesse pour aider à faire business avec background comme ça. Et dernièrement, il y a une loi et un bill pour manager dette, ça c'est gouvernement. Ça c'est pour empêcher le gouvernement de gaspiller l'argent pour suivre règles et pour empêcher peut-être corruption avec bagaille comme ça pour ça passer service primaire.
Yes, and that was the substantive bill after the resumption of the suspension. When we resumed at 3:45, it was really on the public debt management bill. It is a bill which seeks to bring about some accountability and some fiscal policy and procedures in managing public funds. What was interesting, and in his contribution, the leader of the opposition spoke around the bill but could not give a commitment on whether they supported the bill or who was opposed to the bill. And the leader of government business stated that he needed the House to put it down on a record that the leader of opposition business refused to give a commitment on whether such a bill, which was tabled to manage the affairs of the country and to ensure some level of accountability and transparency in managing the funds, that the leader of opposition business does not give a commitment on that. And that was, as we say, the substantive discussion after we resumed.
Oui, avec Jodian, en session, en bas conduite, ça c'est deuxième président et bien vice-président, comme sénateur, ça c'est sénateur Deli, qui était chébé par sénateur, ça c'est président, sénateur Alvina Reynolds, qui attendait une grosse conférence, ça c'est Commonwealth là, en Ghana, ensemble, et puis ça c'est membre parlement pour Miko Nord, ça c'est honorable Jeremiah Norbert Yodea, qui attendait une grosse conférence en pays Afrique, le Ghana. Et aussi nous pas tenu présence, ça c'est sénateur Pauline Antoine Prosper, qui était replacé par ça c'est sénateur Shelton Daniel, replacé. Eh bien, nous venons au bout de cette session aujourd'hui, quand la discussion toujours, mais j'attends qu'un nom de ces techniciens, ça c'est M. Wim Centros avec McLean Remy Plibonnet, Jordana qui est en studio, comme Virgil Leonti qui a assisté ici aujourd'hui. Nous avons dit merci un peu, nous avons souhaité une bonne soirée avec nous avons vu maintenant en studio.